Good evening. Welcome to the earnings review, your tidbits into company financials and operational insights. Thank you for joining us as we broadcast from Hampton Studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. I'm Ibn Mabunda, yo money man. On the show, we engage top echelon executives to get you up to speed with first-hand information. We also chat with the most competent analysts to ensure you're furnished with relevant and comprehensive analysis. Tonight, we focus on Ariston, a diversified industrial as well as agro concern that boasts of decades of experience in agriculture as well as value addition. Now, on to some quick facts where the entity is concerned to get you up to speed with how the entity has come to be as well as is also progressing. Listed in 1948, Ariston Holdings is arguably the most diversified industrial as well as agro concern trading on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. And of course, leveraging on the decades of experience, Ariston is invested in the production of various crops, including tea, macadamia, as well as a wide variety of fruits across the board. The operations of the tea growing units are augmented with a blended tea factory for value addition. Ariston is also invested in poultry as well as livestock. Of note is the fact that while Ariston's products are consumed on the local market, they are majorly produced for the export markets. Now, the group boasts of a nationwide footprint with over 6 estates spread across the country. Notably, they have Southdown Estates, Kent, as well as Claremont. Onto the Southdown, they have over 1,700 hectares of land which are dedicated mostly toward the production of tea, where they have over 1,200 hectares. The rest are intended as well as dedicated toward the production of macadamia as well as bananas. Onto the Claremont Estate, the group produces pome as well as stone fruits. And then, of course, onto the Kent Estate, the group majors on horticultural crops as well as poultry plus livestock. Of note is the fact that the company also packages and distributes blended tea for the local as well as export market. The major revenue drivers for the firm would be macadamia, tea, as well as the diverse basket of fruits. Now, their macadamia products are exported mainly to the Chinese market, to a market that is estimated to be worth $500 million United States dollars globally. And of course, their tea products are shipped to Europe through a South Africa initiative. Now, some vital stats where the group is concerned: with the current share price of 163 cents, the entity has a market capitalization of 2.2 billion Zimbabwean dollars. Its share price has jumped over 75% since the year started, vis-a-vis a consumer staples index that has soared 60%. Comparatively, the ZSE All-Share Index has mounted over 415% over that very same period. Now, a key shareholder holds quite a chunk of shareholding in the entity with over 70% stake, and that would be the Origin global player. Now, this concludes the Halaju section of our show. Now, in just a moment, we will be having an in-house analysis of the operations of Ariston. Now, don't go anywhere. Now, joining us on set to discuss the performance of Ariston Holdings is our very own Chief Analyst at Equity Access, Respect Gwenzi. Respect, good evening, and thank you for joining us on the earnings review.
Thank you, Eben. It's always my pleasure. Good evening, viewers.
Fantastic. Nice jacket you're putting on there.
Thank you.
Fantastic. To break the ice, Ariston is coming into the pith of our discussion on this very edition of the show at a point when we have received their trading update for their third quarter. They've also released their half-year results several weeks back. So I want us to take a look at their performance and how they've fared vis-a-vis the pandemic that is affecting the normalcy of business across the board. Now, just a quick look at their third quarter trading update in terms of their production volumes. Their tea production surpassing their third quarter volumes for 2019 and 2018, coming in at just below 3,000 kilograms. The macadamia falling short of their 2019 performance, coming in at 1,000 kilograms. Their fruit, particularly their pome fruit, which is coming short of 3,000 kilograms for that particular quarter, vis-a-vis 3,500 reported in 2018. Their poultry coming in at about 500 kilograms thereabout, and their maize coming in onto the picture for the very first time. And this, of course, has to do with their production volumes, and of course, as depicted there on the chart. What do we read? I know that this chart would get into the sales volumes, but I'm referring to the production volumes. What can we read from these very figures in as far as their production outturn is concerned?
Thank you, Eben. I think the best way we can approach this is by trying to look at the macro environment under which Ariston is operating.
Indeed.
As well as possibly looking as well at the global dynamics that have been at play over the past few months, just to have a bit of context in terms of how these production matrices are playing out, and also possibly the sales matrices as well. So the macro environment in Zimbabwe has been quite tough. A lot of changes that came into play in 2019, especially to do with the currency. Obviously, it has an impact when we are trying to look at the revenue performance. But also, Ariston plays in the agri sector, which has equally been affected by the drought which we have experienced over the past 2 years, added to the cyclone Idai effect, which hit the eastern parts of the country. So this is the context under which the company has been operating, and in 2020 we now have COVID affecting the local market as well as the international markets, over which it also sells some of its produce too. So the production numbers are a culmination of a whole lot of these factors coming from the climatic issues, which weighed on some of the products, as well as the issues to do with cash flows, which were affected by the fact that they also had to convert some of their flows, that is their foreign currency generated from external sales, into local currency at an interbank rate, whereas their costs had to be incurred in inflation terms. And obviously this affected their cash flow position. But I think if we are to look at an item by item, tea remains one of the key products there. Its volumes were up on last year, but I think when you also get to look at the sales aspect, it is actually down for the 9 months period.
Correct.
To March to June.
Yes.
So I think one of the issue there is the impact of COVID, which has slowed down the markets, demand from the markets, the conventional markets over which they sell much of that product. But demand for macadamia, which is the second biggest product, has remained firm. The Chinese market has kept on sustaining that demand, and the numbers speak in terms of the average prevailing prices. So they've been able to fetch prices which are 2% higher, but the production levels are also lower than the prior year, which is quite an impact of COVID-19, where they had to scale back in terms of the people that were coming to do the harvest and all that. So, but then now getting into the second half, we'll see a recovery in terms of the production numbers from macadamia. I think also looking at pome and stone, the numbers are so down, but overall for fruits, it's largely an impact of bananas, which are down in volume terms compared to last year.
I realize. Also of note would be the poultry section. The volumes are slightly lower than the prior year and the year before, which would be 2018. And we're also seeing maize coming into the picture. There had not been any production in the previous 2 years in as far as maize is concerned, but according to their most recent trading update, we're seeing maize coming into the picture. And according to a statement they issued by the firm, they're saying that this maize refers to the maize seed. I think it's a crop that has been generated to provide seed onto the market, and also a crop that is also being produced for sale as well onto the market.
Yeah, looking at that cluster, I think the biggest the biggest client there in terms of the poultry, they actually sell to one of the biggest poultry provider in Zim. So I think they only sell to a player who then gets to do onward selling to the market in terms of poultry. So the demand there is largely a function of disposable incomes in the market. A slowdown in disposable incomes due to inflation has also weighed on the company's ability to grow its production levels. So the company really highlighted that the slowdown in terms of poultry volumes is a culmination of slowing down disposable incomes. Inflation has been going up sharply. It's now around 735. Last year, around the same time last year, we were sitting at just below 200 thereabout. So I think this has really affected demand for not only poultry but right across the economy. I mean, in terms of the local market. But now looking into maize feed into stock feeds, and it also feed into seed for onward selling to the market. But the main component there is maize that is produced for the purpose of feeding into the stock feed section. And this stock feed section is where they then get to do these poultry services on behalf of this producer in the poultry segment.
Now let's jump into the year-on-year performance, just to get into how some of these key products have fared. I know that we will quickly jump into the subdivisions of the entity, but this would be the performance in terms of the volumes from 2017 right up until 2019, and that chart there detailing the tea, the macadamia, as well as the pome fruit in that regard. And this of course would be for the half year, and over the half year period the tea production volumes declining marginally there to 1,907 tons. Then you also have the pome and stone, which were pretty much constant vis-a-vis the performance of the prior year. But can you shed light in terms of the trend that we are seeing on the tea there? And of course,
yeah, so we're seeing a slowdown in terms of tea production, especially getting into the current half year, which is actually 2020. So this trend has been informed by some of the dynamics that we have mentioned, to say production really, when you're looking at how tea is produced, it's more like you have to harvest. So you count production at a point of harvest. So some of this harvest have been deferred because they rely on bringing in third parties or some of the people in resettlement areas around the farms to come into their own farms and help them do the harvesting. So due to COVID-19, they had to slow down some of these movements so as to manage the spread of the disease within their farms. So this is one of the key factors which affected production for the half year. And also it might be a strategy to realign with the global markets, where we are currently seeing a supply glut. And this supply glut is actually eating into the margins or the realizable value or prices that are prevailing in those markets. So this slowdown in terms of production reflects the impact of COVID, as well as the global supply dynamics, which might deter some of the players in harvesting earlier than they would normally have done.
I realize.
Yeah.
But
I think for other crops, looking at macadamia,
right,
demand remains very firm, and these numbers really speak to a production level that's also easing. I mean, from that prior year to the current year, and this is also equally a culmination of lower yields, which means they did less in terms of the actual ground that they covered in terms of their production. But I think really demand out there remains strong, and they would really recover from this slumber in successive years.
Who are they exporting the macadamia to?
One of the key source in terms of demand is China. They use this product for different elements, but one of them is, it's actually one of the spiritual. It has got a spiritual inclination, but it's also used for different things like creating some fragrances and some soaps and so forth that are used as part of cosmetics and so forth. So this is one of the key uses in terms of that key China market. But also there are other markets, European markets, etc. But the Chinese market remains one of the biggest market. And if you're looking at China, they have over 1 billion in terms of number of people in that respective country. And that's quite a huge market. And I think also looking at some of the dynamics around COVID and how it affected them, and easily it spread to other countries, and sooner they had reopened the economy and GDP was rebounding by as early as Q2. So I think that's what has sustained demand in that respective market, and that's why we are also seeing firm prices in that market as well.
Can you tell us about the pome and the stone fruit? Of course, we have gotten into their recent performance, but I want you to explain in terms of the growth prospects that exist for Ariston in that very direction.
Yeah, this is an exciting vehicle for Ariston. Over the past few years, they have had to the area under production in terms of pome and stone was quite low. So this is an area in Nyanga there, the Claremont Estates, where they do pome and stone. And in this area, they have scaled up production by a very significant margin from 2016 onwards. I think I had the privilege to visit some of the farms in early 2018, and it was projected then that by 2020, this segment of the business would be contributing over a 30% to the top line. And this was quite huge given the kind of investment that had been poured in by the then key investor in the company.
We're just going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into the details with regards to the different units that the business operates under. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, viewers. We are discussing Ariston Holdings, a diversified agro-invested firm operating here in Zimbabwe. The firm, of course, has an export orientation in as far as its production is concerned. And of course, still with me on set is our very own chief analyst at Equity Access, Respect. Now, Respect, at this point, I want us to look into the different units that the business has. Of course, as explained earlier, they have got different segments within the business, and key to their operations and contributing significantly, and as far as revenue is concerned, oscillating and vacillating from a bottom of about 73% to a top of 83%, and playing within that very range would be their Southdown Estate. Can you shed light in terms of their operations and what we can expect from that very business unit?
Yeah, so Southdown Holdings is largely composed of estates that are located in Chipinge, and these are mainly involved in the production of macadamia, tea, avocados, and of course a bit of bananas there. So this is the composition of these Southdown Holdings estates. So within that, you then find tea dominating in terms of value contribution, just because it also accounts for the majority of the land under production as well. So they have got the largest component of land under production within them. group of products or crops that Ariston is into. So then, besides that, in terms of the overall contribution to the group, it has got a higher contribution compared to Claremont, which is where we said they do Pome and stone, as well as the Kent, where they do poultry. So that's how significant that market is. So within the Southdown Holdings, we have got some of the key estates there, which are about 3 estates within the broader Southdown Holdings estates, and they also have a tea processing plant which is located at one of the farms. So this is how the Southdown Holdings estates as a unit is organized.
And I know that you have been on site, you have looked at the operations very much at length.
Yeah, sure.
Yes. Can you spell the potentialities that exist in as far as the business units are concerned, and perhaps the impact of the pandemic given what's playing out around?
Yes, I think it's quite significant. Ariston is quite significant in that it feeds into a sector which is key or pivotal to economic growth of this country. Agriculture is quite key, and they've done a lot of investments within the farms. They've got irrigation facilities which ensure that they have got adequate water to do proper irrigation on some of their farms. Although some of the crops may not demand as much in terms of water, but they still have got adequate water bodies and also mechanization to see through some of the productions that they would have projected for a given period. But I think one key emerging development there is how macadamia is almost moving to overlap some of the contributing products there. Over the next 4 years, they want to double up in terms of the land under which macadamia is planted. But I also know that you've got Tanganda tea there, which is a competitor. They're also scaling up in terms of their production numbers, and you've got also Makandi in that same area. And all these are believed to be putting it intense competition. And I think when you're looking at the Tanganda dynamic, the Mikos group, how it has evolved on disposing one of the key units in the hotel business and redirecting part of those proceeds into mechanizing some of their farms. You would possibly understand that they've now one of the largest solar, they're actually erecting some solar energy in Chipinge at some of these farms. So I think these are huge developments that might tilt, especially the things that are around irrigation or farm mechanization. As per competition in that respective area. So I think that dynamic is quite important. Macadamia is emerging simply because there's strong demand, especially coming from Asia, and it might overtake tea. Of course, tea, in the past 2 or so years, it has been rebounding, but there's a point in time over the past 5 or so years when demand globally was quite deep for our respective or the kind of tea that we produce here in Zimbabwe.
But to perhaps talk about the macadamia, I mean, this is a market that is worth just below $1 billion, and over the past few years, we've seen potential coming from macadamia. But also of note is the fact that China has undertaken an initiative to actually ramp up the production of macadamia. Do you think that could have a trickling effect on exporters such as Ariston getting into the future?
Indeed, it is a deterrent to growth, but I think that new markets are equally emerging in some areas of the globe. But of course, it will be very difficult to try to replace that Chinese demand. It's also an emerging demand because it wasn't there all these years. It suddenly came alive over the past few years. So I don't think that it will come in as early to replace this, but it might take 10 to 15 years because of the cycles that are involved in the production of macadamia. But indeed, it is a long-term threat, and it might rebalance or retilt the scale in disfavor of macadamia as the main product. But currently, I think fetching at over $5.50 per kg on the good quality grade, I still feel that there is a high margin because the cost of production per kg is something less than $2.30 thereabout. And so I think the margin is too huge. I mean, looking at that cost differential.
I realize. Now, can you spell out the other operations for particularly at Kent, and how important they are for the group, and perhaps the growth prospects that would exist for that very unit getting into the future?
Yes, I think I've touched a bit in terms of what kind of investment has been put. These are several millions, upwards of 5 or so million that has been put in to production at the estates at Claremont in Nyanga, which is where they do Pome and stone. You see, when I was on site, I also got the impression that it could be a game changer in terms of rebalancing the scale, in terms of revenue as well. Because when you're looking at 30% of income now being attributed to that sector, it really cushions Ariston in terms of or in times where there might be volatility. So I think by having so many products which can be exported and generate hard currency, it actually improves diversification and it sobers down the revenue that can be generated. So that's how significant this particular investment is. But also, when you're looking at Pome and stone, some of it, or in fact most of it, currently is being sold within the local market. And that I think, given the dynamics around currency, might also not be a very much huge development. But they need to explore markets, especially Europe, where they could send fresh fruit and so forth. Of course, yeah, they could also value add some of the products locally, but I think much of the value is through exportation of these products, and obviously high-end shops in Zim where they could also be distributing part of that product.
Quite interesting. Can you tell us about the impact of two things: power issues that embattle Zimbabwe at the moment, as well as developments around climatic changes? I know, of course, that they are in Region 1, which is the one that receives the most rainfall among other areas in as far as Zimbabwe is concerned. How prepared is Ariston in terms of reducing exposure on these two fronts?
Yeah, the power challenge in Zim has been quite detrimental, especially in the past year. But moving into 2020, there's been improvements in terms of power supply. We have been importing at least adequate power supplies. I mean, lately we've been receiving adequate power supplies, and productive bases have been more prioritized. And so Ariston has equally benefited from this, but it's merely a bridging gap. You are only trying to cover in a gap. But now Kariba is back on course. But then, of course, climatic issues as well get to supply the source, because once they are sustained droughts, it also means that Kariba will be low in terms of the amount of water that it will readily contain, and it also means that generation gets to slow down and you have to import, and importing is a function of forex. So it ends up affecting again supply of electricity, which is key when you are using irrigation. So I think some of these are not inherent factors, but for Ariston, they do have got own water bodies, and they do have got irrigation, but they don't have self-generating power, which is the difference, which is a different scenario when you factor in what Tanganda is doing. They have been able to build their own solar power station, within that Chipinge area, where they hold a vast majority of tea and macadamia farms. So yeah, I could say they're prepared because they have alternative water supply to what we receive from the skies. But then in terms of power, they are still vulnerable to what the country can supply, and generators may not be able to really fulfill sustained supply of the power that they might need to be doing constant and consistent irrigation.
Lastly, and very quickly before you go, there was an outstanding issue with regards to one of the states. I think that was Claremont. Has that issue been clarified and done away with, in as far as the ownership of that piece of land?
Yeah, there's been a contention, but I'm informed that that issue might be passed in terms of it has been cleared. And I think that asset really is the future of Ariston, if I may say.
Fair enough. Well, thank you so much. Respect for the insights. Thank you, viewers, for staying with us. Don't forget to join us every Tuesday, every Thursday, 7 p.m. Central African Time. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, as well as to visit our informative website, www.equityaccess.net. Ibn Mabunda from Harare. This is Equity Access.